Before the world obsessed over speed, it fell in love with smoothness. There was a time when engineers weren't chasing record books, they were chasing perfection. In the early 20th century, when machines still carried the soul of their makers, the V12 engine emerged not as a product, but as a promise. It whispered of balance, so pure that every piston seemed to move in harmony with the next. 12 cylinders, working together like the instruments of an orchestra, each note precise, deliberate, and eternal. The V12 was not built for convenience, it was built for pride. Its creators didn't think about efficiency or cost. They thought about art, vibrationless motion, and the elegance of engineering made audible. Every revolution of its crankshaft was a heartbeat of ambition, a sound that told the world humanity could sculpt metal into music. Even today, when technology has moved far beyond carburetors and chrome, that deep, silken hum of a V12 can still make men stop mid-sentence. It was the moment machines became something more than tools. They became a reflection of human grace, power, and purpose. The 1920s and 1930s were an era when ambition outpaced reason. Nations were rebuilding, industries were awakening, and in the workshops of Europe, a quiet revolution was humming to life. This was when the V12 became more than a mechanical layout. It became an obsession. Rolls-Royce, Hispano-Suiza, and a handful of dreamers looked toward the sky for inspiration. Airplanes had proven that smooth, continuous power meant survival, and these engineers sought to bring that same grace down to earth. Rolls-Royce called their V12 the engine of the gods, and for good reason. Each was hand-finished, polished not just for performance but for beauty. They weren't assembled, they were conducted, like a symphony written in metal. Hispano-Suiza, on the other hand, treated its engines like fine jewelry. Chrome, brass, and precision machining turned their creations into rolling art pieces. They didn't roar, they sang. Their power was less about domination and more about confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've achieved perfection. These weren't engines for the masses. They were crafted for the few who understood that true luxury wasn't about comfort, it was about control. Every revolution of a V12 was a statement of mastery over chaos. It was mechanical poetry, written in the language of torque and timing. And as the world stood on the brink of industrial transformation, the V12 stood as its crown jewel, an idea too perfect to fade quietly. The obsession had begun, and soon it would spread beyond Europe, reaching across oceans and decades to inspire a generation of machines destined to become legends. In post-war Italy, when the streets still carried the echo of conflict, one man was dreaming in octaves, not numbers. Enzo Ferrari didn't see engines as tools. He saw them as instruments. Each cylinder, each valve, each perfectly timed explosion was a note in a greater mechanical symphony. And at the center of it all was his beloved V12. Ferrari's obsession wasn't with mere power, it was with emotion, the kind that makes the hairs on your arm rise when a car passes by, singing rather than screaming. When Enzo listened to his first V12 come to life in 1947, he didn't hear a machine, he heard art. The engine, he once said, is the heart of the car. The rest are just organs that serve it. And his heart beat with 12 perfect pulses. The Colombo-designed 1.5-litre V12, light and eager, became Ferrari's calling card. Its sound, that smooth, rising wail, was the auditory signature of Italian pride. Mechanics tuned them by ear, not instruments. Each engine had personality. Each was unique. In the dim light of Maranello's workshops, craftsmen treated metal like marble, carving emotion into every curve and combustion chamber. To own a Ferrari was to hold a piece of poetry that bled fuel and fire. To hear one was to understand why Enzo's creations weren't cars. They were confessions of passion. His V12s didn't just power legends, they created them. In the early 1960s, northern Italy's air was thick with pride and competition. Ferruccio Lamborghini wasn't a racer. He was a tractor builder turned millionaire. He admired Ferrari's cars, but he also knew machines. And when his new Ferrari refused to start, he found himself face to face with Enzo Ferrari himself. "The problem," Enzo sneered, "is that a farmer should stick to tractors." It was meant as an insult. Instead, it ignited a rebellion. Lamborghini went home, furious but inspired. If Ferrari built symphonies, he would build thunder. Within months, he assembled a small team of engineers, men who'd worked under Ferrari and shared his frustrations. Their mission? Create a V12 that could not only match Maranello's song, but drown it out. By 1963, the first Lamborghini 350 GT V12 roared to life, and it was breathtaking. Smooth yet savage, elegant yet defiant. Unlike Ferrari's racing engines, Lamborghinis were built for the road, powerful, reliable, and impossibly beautiful. They didn't just compete, they declared independence. Each rev was a reminder that arrogance can forge greatness when met with ambition. The rivalry became legend. Two men bound by 12 cylinders and separated by ego. Ferrari's engines sang of tradition and soul. Lamborghini's howled of rebellion and freedom. One was opera, the other was rock and roll. And from that moment, Europe's roads would never sound the same again. In the roaring 1930s, while Europe perfected refinement, America chased grandeur. The nation was pulsing with confidence, and its automakers wanted the world to know that innovation didn't stop at the Atlantic. The Lincoln Zephyr, born in 1936, became the nation's bold reply to Europe's aristocracy. Its sleek aerodynamic body and smooth V12 engine promised something revolutionary: American elegance wrapped in power. It wasn't just a car, it was a declaration that Detroit could build machines that whispered luxury as loudly as they thundered down the open road. But Lincoln wasn't alone. Cadillac, ever the showman of American excess, took the dream further. Past reason, past necessity, into the realm of pure audacity. 16 cylinders, hand-built precision, and an engine so smooth you could balance a coin on it while idling. The Cadillac V16 wasn't about transportation, it was about dominance. Every turn of the crankshaft was a symphony of excess, America's mechanical middle finger to Europe's refinement. Yet beneath the chrome and confidence there was a fragility. The Great Depression loomed, and the market for 12 and 16-cylinder masterpieces was vanishing. The Zephyr and Cadillac V16 became symbols of a nation that believed anything was possible, until reality hit. Their engines represented a fleeting moment when craftsmanship dared to dream louder than economics, and Detroit's factories hummed with the sound of ambition echoing through steel and pride. By the 1950s, America had conquered roads, oceans, and even the skies. But the world was changing, and so was the nation's appetite. The V12, once a symbol of untouchable luxury, had become an extravagance few could justify. Gas was cheap, but practicality was the new pride. As highways stretched and suburbs bloomed, efficiency began whispering louder than power. The post-war years turned engineers into economists. 12 cylinders became too many. The Cadillac V16 faded into history, and Lincoln quietly shelved its V12s. Consumers wanted convenience, not complexity. When the fuel crises of the 1970s hit, it wasn't just the engines that stalled. It was the dream itself. The sound of those mighty motors gave way to quieter, smaller hums. The world had fallen out of love with excess. But the V12 didn't die in shame. It retired in glory. Its legacy lingered in the hum of V8s, in the chrome reflections of Sunday car shows, in the memories of those who remembered when cars were built for passion, not practicality. America's V12s were never meant to last forever. They were meant to remind the world and themselves that for a brief, shining moment, Detroit dreamed like an artist and built like a god. In a world obsessed with noise, Japan chose silence. While Europe and America built engines to shout their superiority, Toyota quietly crafted one that whispered dignity. In 1997, the Toyota Century V12 was born. Not for racetracks, not for fame, but for emperors and diplomats. It was a car that didn't need to prove anything, because its very existence was proof enough. This was Japan's answer to decades of Western excess. 12 cylinders, hand-assembled by a single master technician, tuned not for aggression, but for grace. Its engineers called it the 1GZFE, an engine so smooth that a coin balanced on its valve cover wouldn't tremble. No screaming exhaust notes, no flamboyant revs, just a quiet hum, the sound of mechanical serenity. Where Ferrari built drama and Cadillac built spectacle, Toyota built silence. The Century's V12 wasn't designed to excite you, it was designed to calm you. Inside, the car felt more like a temple than a machine. Wool seats instead of leather, lacquered wood instead of chrome. It reflected a nation that saw power not in volume, but in control. And while the world barely noticed, Japan had created something profound, a final salute to engineering purity. The Century's V12 wasn't about dominance, it was about devotion. A masterpiece hidden in plain sight, it proved that true greatness doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs to breathe quietly. By the late 1990s, when the rest of the world was worshipping horsepower and acceleration, Japan was meditating on balance. The V12 had become a symbol of prestige elsewhere, but in Japan, it evolved into something philosophical. The Toyota Century's V12 didn't seek to dominate, it sought to disappear, to make power invisible, seamless, effortless. This wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Japan's engineers understood that true engineering mastery isn't about how loud you can shout, it's about how quietly you can achieve perfection. While Western automakers competed in a noisy arms race of speed and spectacle, Japan refined silence into an art form. The Century became the embodiment of that idea, a car whose strength was felt, not heard. Even the way it was built reflected restraint. Each engine was assembled by hand, each car delivered with a whisper, never a roar. The V12 became a metaphor for the Japanese spirit itself, precise, patient, unshakable. It was elegance without ego, but in that perfection lay a quiet tragedy. The Century's V12 represented the end of an era, the last breath of a world that valued harmony over hype. As hybrid technology emerged and the global shift toward efficiency began, Japan's stillness became a prophecy. While others chased power, Japan was already learning how to let go. By the 1970s, the roar that once defined power began to fade beneath a new kind of noise, the hum of politics, oil, and responsibility. The same engines that had symbolized human achievement were suddenly labeled wasteful, excessive, even dangerous. Governments tightened their grip, issuing emissions laws that turned passion into paperwork. Fuel prices spiked, and what was once a badge of pride became a mark of arrogance. The V12, with all its majesty and inefficiency, was an easy target. Car companies that once prided themselves on 12-cylinder symphonies now faced a future obsessed with miles per gallon and grams of CO2. The age of the engineer gave way to the age of the accountant. Designers were told to make engines smaller, cleaner, quieter, but not better. Across continents, icons fell one by one. Jaguar, Mercedes, Ferrari, all were forced to compromise. Progress, the word that once meant better, began to mean less. The world no longer wanted to feel power, it wanted to measure it. The open road gave way to regulations, and freedom was traded for compliance. The golden age of over-engineering didn't end with an explosion, it ended with silence. The quiet approval of efficiency and the slow suffocation of passion. The V12 hadn't failed. The world around it had simply forgotten why it existed in the first place. Even the great names, the ones that built their reputations on the rhythm of 12 cylinders, began to mourn. Ferrari softened its scream. Aston Martin lowered its voice. Rolls-Royce, once defined by the quiet hum of perfection, turned to smaller engines, wrapped in memory. Luxury didn't sound the same anymore. The symphony had lost its instruments. For the men who built them, it wasn't just about engines, it was about purpose. Workshops that once echoed with the metallic pulse of ambition now hummed with computers and compliance. The mechanical romance was gone. Car enthusiasts watched the change unfold with quiet heartbreak. Every time a V12 disappeared, a chapter of history closed. They didn't just mourn the loss of power, they mourned the loss of character. The engines that once roared with defiance were now ghosts in museums and collector garages, silent reminders of what used to be possible. But even in that silence, something lingered, an ember of rebellion. The spirit of the V12 refused to die, because, deep down, humanity still craves the sound of its own creation, that perfect balance of chaos and harmony. And somewhere in that longing, a spark was waiting to ignite again. For a while, it seemed the V12 had vanished into legend, a relic whispered about at car meets and remembered in documentaries. But legends have a way of defying extinction. In the shadows of modern efficiency, a few visionaries still dared to dream in 12 cylinders. Aston Martin, Pagani, and Ferrari, names that refused to bow to silence, became the torchbearers of mechanical immortality. Aston Martin's V12, hand-assembled and beating within the DB11 and Valkyrie, carried old-world craftsmanship into the new age. It wasn't about numbers anymore, it was about soul. Pagani, guided by art rather than industry, sculpted engines that were as much sculptures as machines, each one a love letter to the lost art of motion. And Ferrari, the eternal guardian of passion, created its final pure V12, as if writing poetry for the end of an era. These modern V12 engines weren't built for mass markets, they were built for memory, to remind humanity that perfection is worth preserving, even when it makes no practical sense. Every startup of a V12 today feels like a heartbeat returning after silence. It's not rebellion anymore, it's reverence. A quiet salute to the engineers, dreamers, and believers who refused to let the music die. The V12 was never just an engine. It was a mirror, reflecting humanity's hunger to create something unnecessary yet unforgettable. In every era, it stood as proof that we build not only for survival, but for the beauty of it. And though the world now hums with electricity instead of exhaust, the echo of 12 cylinders still vibrates somewhere deep within those who remember. It lives in the way we speak of old machines, the way a sound clip of a Ferrari 250 GTO can still make millions pause. It lives in the way artists, designers, and engineers chase perfection, knowing full well it can never be caught. The V12 was never about speed, it was about feel. It was humanity's heartbeat, measured in revolutions per minute. Today, that echo continues, not in noise, but in spirit. Every modern innovation, every whisper-quiet electric hum carries a trace of that same longing to build something greater than ourselves. The V12 may fade from production lines, but it will never fade from memory. Because engines die, legends echo, and as long as someone, somewhere, still feels a pulse quicken at the sound of 12 pistons in harmony, the spirit of the V12 and the dream it carried will never be truly silent.